Let's bring on Professor Robert Patman. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. And my apologies for being so late on the way to connect. I've already said on air how much of a terrible human being I am.
Oh, well, I don't believe that, Pat.
Thank you for joining us. Now, I spoke to Robert over the weekend and last week about talking about this, and we had to kind of nut out how we were going to talk about this and what we were going to talk about. See, I'm quite interested in talking about a topic that I sort of talked about last week a little bit, but I wanted to get some other input into it. I did kind of a solo piece about it. And it's based around this idea that Elon Musk tweeted out. Now, I don't feel the need to talk about Elon Musk and what he's saying about himself, because I think this is something that we hear a lot. When I did the piece on Friday, I talked about Senator or Congressman Kasich and how he has publicly said, I didn't leave the Republican Party left me. How we hear people in New Zealand saying things like, well, Labour used to be the party for the worker. Now it's not. Now, I'm not saying any of these are accurate. I'm just saying we hear this a lot. And we hear people saying the left has gone way woke or way left or way identity politics, whatever you want to do. And we hear about people saying about the right going, Trumpian, way to the right. And that's sort of what I wanted to talk about. And I think your expertise as an expert in international politics, Robert, might enable us to talk about this from the American perspective, because I think that's where you see it most clearly. In fact, I did a piece last week where I kind of said, after looking at what the Republicans are doing right now, what they have done and what they are doing, makes me kind of grateful for our national party a little bit, because even though that's not necessarily where I sit personally, it's nothing like what you're seeing the right doing around the world. So that's a bit of a long introduction to say, we're kind of talking about this sort of nebulous thing, Robert, but I just want to throw it to you and you can start us off and add to that and we'll go from there. What do you think about this idea of the left going further left, the right going further right, and a bunch of people who were left in the center, or perhaps they were center left, like this tweet saying, now being talked about as being right wing, or maybe if they're John Kasich, they're now talking about being liberal because they haven't followed the Trumpians to the right.
Yeah, I mean, I think these developments, the polarization of the United States, and to some degree the polarization of a number of other countries in Europe, is linked to the rise of the social media in the last 15 years or so. This is a revolutionary change that we've seen, where, in a sense, the mainstream media, particularly in the United States, has found itself bypassed to some degree, with lots of people getting their news from Facebook, Twitter, and other. And of course, anyone could basically. There's been attempts by after the Christchurch terror atrocity, there's the Christchurch Call, an initiative led by the Prime Minister and also President Macron, to try to curb online extremism. But there's no doubt about it. A lot of people behave in the social media in a way they would never dream of in face-to-face dialogue, like we're engaging in now. But they would say, and I think we've all been on the receiving end of it as well, people who make really unfair and gratuitously rude and intolerant remarks about one. And I think that's contributed to a climate that some politicians have seen an opportunity. And I think Donald Trump saw an opportunity. So I think one thing that's probably fueled this has been the social media. Now, look, I'm a great fan of the social media. There's some wonderful people in there. There's some brilliant commentary. It's a wonderful source of information. I'm just saying, I think that may be, Pat, there may be the potential for a downside there. That the technology has actually empowered people who have quite extreme views. And I think it may have had an effect of polarizing societies. The second thing here is it's not just down to the social media. I think also there has been disappointment with the liberal dream. There was the 2008 financial crisis, 2009. In New Zealand, we were sometimes we were affected by it, but not in any way like the United States, where 1 in 4 people lost I think it was 1 in 4 people saw their the value of the mortgage exceed the value of their house. It was an extraordinarily traumatic time in the United States. And if we're trying to look at, the origins of this polarization that we're alluding to, then perhaps those developments are linked to it. But yeah, I mean, to me, it was epitomized, this polarization, most graphically when there were 47 members of the Republican Party in the United States actually opposed an investigation into the circumstances which led to the insurrection in the United States, which, on Capitol Hill in January 2021, which led to the death of 8 people. I was just astonished that, putting aside, they could not put aside politics to actually investigate actions which were criminal. So, yeah, I think it's very pronounced. I think ultimately political leadership is the key to healing some of these divisions, but it's going to take, for many politicians, I think, once the society is divided, there's a temptation to exploit perceived grievances and build your political, career that way. For example, Ted Cruz has just applauded the takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk as a tremendous breakthrough for free speech in the United States. And I find it disquieting. And I'm glad you mentioned about New Zealand, because I think the United States has seen its position as a role model for democracy substantially decline, as seen through other democracies. And I think we should try to hold on what's working here, and not simply, at one stage, America was always the sort of, the model to be emulated. At least that was the perception. If it doesn't happen in America, it doesn't happen in the world, sort of thing. I think those days are over now. And I think that, New Zealand has a lot to be, without being complacent. Democracy is always a work in progress, but I think we've got a far less divided society than many others. Although we saw with the protests in Wellington that a lot of people are affected by the social media, and people are operating in parallel universes, and they don't have the same facts.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, so that's sort of seems to me to be a reaction, if social media is stoking it and stuff, to actual fake news. Do you know what I mean? Like, people actually falling for things, and then leaders being opportunistic indeed. Like, to me, I've always said Donald Trump has paid for a lot of abortions in his life, I'm pretty sure. And then to him be there, who stacked that Supreme Court in a way that is so detrimental to the health of women because of his opportunism, is so disgusting to me. And I just find it reprehensible that way.
I agree with you, Penny. It's cynical, and it's just, if you like, self-advancement. Looking at the landscape, saying, how can I advance? Oh, fake news is a good line. I always get worried when politicians blame the media. We've had 1 or 2 politicians in this country who scapegoat the media, and my alarm bells always go off, because the media is like any other profession. There are good and bad people in it, but by and large, the job they do is really important in a democracy, which is to convey information. Sometimes that information can be inconvenient for certain politicians, and it's very good that information continues to be conveyed, because we're not there to create a comfort zone for politicians. And all dictators, of course, or authoritarian leaders, one of the first things they do is manipulate and control the media.
Yeah. One thing I will say is I get frustrated because the media is a victim of this all as well, right? Because clickbait drives their incomes, and so then they're more inclined to promote things that are more inflammatory rather than using reasoned political discourse and analysis. And so then that fuels all of that, and then it's just this cycle as well. So I don't think the media is completely innocent in all of this. But yes, as soon as anybody moves to stifle the media, then I'll be right at the front saying that as well. But I think it's complicated with all of that.
Let me jump in here before we jump back in, Robert, because I hadn't queued this. I haven't queued this up to play it, so I might be up by a second or two, so bear with me. But something that you said, Robert, and also now what you guys are talking about to do with the media, I also want to know, though, and maybe this is more of a question for a psychologist, is that when the media demonstrate clearly what's going on, we still don't believe them. There is a candidate in the US at the moment who has flip-flopped so much, who has changed his position so much, it looks like a different person who is now trying to get elected versus who was talking about Trump. I'll play you a little bit if you haven't seen it, and you'll see what I mean. This is the same person.
As somebody who doesn't like Trump myself, the elites were right about Donald Trump, right? I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
He's the best president of my lifetime, and he revealed the corruption in this country like nobody else.
I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place. I think that he was a good president. I think he made a lot of good decisions for people.
I take it you're not a Trump supporter from what I've read. Am I right? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. I didn't vote for Trump.
All around, he was a great president. I'm 37 years old. Certainly the best president of my lifetime.
Wow.
So when you've got these people who are then actually, you're talking about the media and the role the media has got to play. When the media shows literally exactly the bullshit that's going on, still doesn't seem to resonate.
No, that's true. But, you know, lying can work. I mean, we've got a lot of politicians at the moment who do not value, I don't mean false consistency, but they're not moored by a certain set of values. And they're just opportunists. They like the attention that a political job gives them. And, you know, J.D. Vance's position is probably more widespread than we find. If you're ambitious, as he clearly is, and he wants to do well in the Republican Party, and Donald Trump is the kingmaker at the moment in the Republican Party, he's doing what's necessary to get that Senate seat. If he comes out against Trump, that could really complicate him. It might boost his public standing amongst those Republicans, and there are quite a few of them who don't like Trump. But from his point of view, that's a long-term project, and he's not interested. So, you know, the worry I have actually about this is that we were speaking about democracy. I think one area where democracy needs to improve itself, if I may say so, and I think I've always taken the view that democracy is a work in progress. It's never the finished product. And one area we need to really think about globally and nationally is who controls the media. Should rich people who happen to be rich, you know, one of the things I find ironical is that since the 1990s, where we have the fantastic technical ability through this information and digital revolution to disseminate information in a way we've never done before historically. So we can literally now put news around the planet and images almost in real time. And that's an incredible thing, and it's new. But the irony is that since this process has gathered momentum, the advent of social media we've just referred to, the ownership of the major media outlets has become concentrated in ever fewer hands.
Yeah.
So we now have Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. You know, they're all in the top 13 richest people in the world. They basically are controlling a lot of the media. And I think that's unhealthy in a democracy. I do not think, for example, in a democracy, a person should own more than one newspaper. I never understood why Rupert Murdoch was allowed to take on American citizenship to extend his control. After all, if you really believe in free competition, I actually do, then you want diversity and ownership.
Yeah. And I think that's part of why it's not as polarized in New Zealand, because we haven't had News Corp or anybody like that in our media landscape, because they did own something briefly in early 2000s or something, and they've been out ever since. And I think that totally shows. And obviously social media stokes division, but because we have generally, do you know what I mean? Like, it's so funny. The left goes on about how right-wing the media is, and then the right goes on about how left-wing the media is. But I actually do think that there is a balance between them all. And I think that's helped because we don't have any interests like that.
But I do think that, you know, the technology has actually got ahead of the rules governing the need for diversity and balance. And I think that this is a really big issue in democracy. I mean, Carol Coldwalder, who a wonderful journalist for The Guardian, has made the point, and I think it's a fair point, that given the changes in technology, in the distribution of information, we seriously need to reconsider how we conduct fair and free elections in this context. And it seems to me that this is an issue that doesn't get a lot of airing in democracy. But you could argue, coming back to my earlier point, there is a tension between some a few oligarchs, very rich oligarchs, owning just some of the world's biggest media outlets. And I do think that that's ultimately quite unhealthy. And we really need, in a democracy, to make sure there is a diversity of opinion.
Yeah.
Let me ask one more question, and you can both answer that. I'll answer this as well. The example I just gave of JD Vance, right, flipping like that from one to the other, is sort of almost an exact example of where this conversation began. He is demonstrating moving to the right. Now, I think most of us would think that's not his actual position. I think most of us would think he's playing a role or lying, as Robert said, to get elected. But this idea of moving further to the right is where we started this conversation, or further to the left if you're on the left. I wanted to know from you guys if you thought that is happening. Is, for example, the left in New Zealand, the left in America, the left in general, moving further to the left? Is the right moving further to the right? And if it is does one create more danger, or are there more concerns around one party moving from, let's say, what their traditional base was to where they are now?
Who do you want to start with? Robert.
Well, in the American context, I'm rather baffled about these claims that America's moving to the left. What to me is plain is that the Republicans have basically given up the center ground and gone to the extreme right. I mean, let's be quite clear about this. There are a number of members of the Republican Senate actually supporting Putin in the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And you've got Fox News acting as a cheerleader. I mean, Mr. Putin's the media that supports Putin, the state-controlled media in Russia, carry clips from Fox News, and with approval. This is extraordinary, and to go so far right that Mr. Putin's actions now are viewed with approval as a strongman leader. I just find it extraordinary. And admittedly, those may be fringe elements, but it's amazing that there are groups of 8 or 10 Republicans prepared to do that at all. On the left, we've heard that American politics, Ocasio-Cortez is sometimes cited as being on the left, as is Bernie Sanders. But in European terms or New Zealand terms, they're probably social democrats.
Yeah.
They're not asking for nationalization or anything like that. They're basically asking for things like healthcare being a right, not a privilege, and asking for greater security around job employment, things like that. So I'm a bit baffled by those claims.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, like, to me, I know that I am left-wing and therefore biased, but the extreme left is we treat everybody with respect and everybody can eat properly and be warm. And on the right, it's this extreme, difference in income. It's complete erosion of women's rights, like around body autonomy, around women's rights, and things like forcing women to have transvaginal ultrasounds before they're allowed to have an abortion. If they, to not give an abortion exemption for underage rape victims, and that's some sort of victory for the right. I mean, that's what I see. And to me, I am glad that we don't have that here. Like, I think we have a lot of fiscally conservative people, but socially liberal people generally in New Zealand. And when you push back against that in a different way, that does not fly well. Like we just, for the last census, we clicked over into being a more secular society, and we don't like it when religion gets involved in our politics. Like people have an actual reaction to it, like Christopher Luxon is playing that down, so I think it's in any way the same as it is over there, where I saw a survey and the people trusted atheists less than pedophiles in America. Like, this is truly insane. So I'm glad that we don't have that to the same degree completely. And I think that we're getting more and more rights for sort of traditionally represented and marginalized people in New Zealand. So I think that is changing. But yeah, to me, the extreme left just seems like a world where we respect each other.
All right. Hey, Robert, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you giving up some of your time, and now you can go back to do your real job rather than this silliness that we're doing. So thank you, sir. I appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you. All the best.